everyone, and welcome to Pops and Hisses, a music podcast where you hear from the artists you love. I'm your host, Kevin Coffey, and in this episode, I sat down with Chris DeMakes, singer and guitarist of punk ska band Less Than Jake. They've been a band for 30 years, and classic albums like Pezcore and Hello Rockview are now decades old, but they never stopped making music. Recently, they released a brand new record called Silver Linings, and it's their first album without drummer and lyricist Vinny Fiorello, but I can attest to the fact that it's another great album in a long line of albums. If you like Less Than Jake, you're going to love Silver Linings. Chris and fellow lead singer Roger Lima took over lyrical duties, and they made a fantastic record. So I sat down with Chris to talk about Silver Linings and everything else they've been doing during pandemic times, and it's been a lot. Chris especially has been busy. He kicked off his songwriting podcast, Chris DeMakes A Podcast, which has all kinds of people you would know if you're a fan of Less Than Jake and other pop-punk bands, but also tons of famous artists too, and he's got lots more on the way. Chris also released a new book, a photo book documenting kind of the history of Less Than Jake, and it's really cool. Real quick, I want to remind you that you can listen to Pops and Hisses podcast and find music news, reviews, and interviews at popsandhisses.com. But right now, it's time for Chris DeMakes of Less Than Jake. Let's get into it. I wanted to talk about a bunch of different stuff. I know you started the podcast. I want to talk about that for sure. But how's the band spent the last year or so? Especially, normally you guys would be playing a lot of shows, like a lot.
Yeah, the band. We have weekly phone calls. We have restructured some things. We revamped our merchandise store, which has been great. So every month every 4 to 6 weeks, we're putting out limited edition merchandise. We re-released our B is for B-Sides and Anthem records on vinyl. We had our new album come out last year, Silver Linings. We did our live stream show, and we have other ones planned for this year. Did some Lost at Home sessions, we were calling, where we released 3 songs from our own respective home studios. Like, we piecemealed some songs together and gave some of the proceeds away for charity. So, we stayed busy. We've always been a working band. Just because we couldn't go out and tour, it didn't mean that the shop shut down. Yeah,
for sure. I know some bands just kind of were like, well, we didn't do anything. But you guys obviously didn't let that happen.
No. A ton of bands did absolutely nothing. I don't understand that unless they all just, to me, it has nothing to do with even the financial aspect of putting product out and trying to, keep the business afloat financially. For me, it's more just from we've been a band almost 30 years.
Right.
We go away for 4, 5, 6 years. You can't. You have to stay in people's faces and do your thing. And we've always done that, and it's worked for us. So this, if anything, we did our best to stay out there even more.
For sure. It's interesting to me that it's a lot of punk bands I've noticed that have been like doing live streams, putting out new things, re-releasing old things. And I don't know if it's like that punk rock mentality of like, you got to grind it out.
I think really so. I know that there's a lot of guys that, and I've mentioned this on other shows recently and other interviews, guys, friends of mine that are in superstar bands, big, huge bands, way bigger than Less Than Jake, and then bands even smaller than ours that are equally depressed, like having real issues, because this is all that they've ever known. And pretty much the same for me too. But I approached it as, the older that I wouldn't have approached it this way 10 or even 20 years ago. The older that I get, I all those stupid sayings that you heard growing up, either from your parents or teachers, but the everything happens for a reason. That stupid frickin' saying. When this whole thing went down, I'm like, okay, I have no control over this, so I have to accept it. And sometimes acceptance is the hardest thing with anything in life. And I just accepted that I'm not going to be on the road. And I accepted that as a good thing because, man, I've spent 28 years gone away from home, missing weddings, funerals, birthdays, all that stuff. And I'm not complaining about that. It's what I signed up to do. And it's been a great ride. And I've been fortunate to have this career But I took this as, you know what? I'm going to enjoy this time off away from the road, and it's been great.
That's awesome. Yeah, I can't imagine half your life you've not been at home, but to be able to actually enjoy that. That's awesome.
It's been it's been different. That's the only word I can describe.
So tell me about making the record. You guys actually made it in 2019, right? It was
we made
done
it
or mostly done. Yeah, we
did the whole thing in November for about 2.5 weeks, and then we split for Thanksgiving holiday and maybe another week and a half. We came back middle of December and finished up a couple backing vocals and maybe a guitar overdub or two. We just kind of sat on it and figured out what else we wanted to put on it. So yeah, the album was done, and we had a bunch of release dates last year, and they just kept getting pushed back because we kept thinking, at some point we might be able to go out and tour behind it. And that didn't happen. So, I think that right now is the best time in the world to put a record out, though, because people are starving for entertainment.
Yeah. Especially when your fans might get their fix from, going to see you at a club or a theater or whatever, wherever you're playing. And they're like, well, yeah, I can't go see them, but I'm damn sure going to listen to this record.
Yeah. I think it's been, I think our record got double the attention it would have gotten if there was other things going on.
Right. Yeah. And so I read that you guys wrote some things in the studio as you were working on it.
Well, yeah, there was one track that ended up being the lead-off song on the album, "High Cost of Low Living."
Yeah.
That was the horn melody. It was something I had in my voice memo on my phone. I think I was on an airplane, and the melody just came to me, and I was just like, and I was in the hotel in Gainesville, and we had done all the drum tracks for all the songs. And I had this feeling of like, I just don't think this record's done. I think we have one more in us. And I was going through my memos on my phone, and I heard that line. I'm like, man, that is catchy. So I went in the studio the next day, and I said to the guys, hey, before we break the drums down, while everything's still set up, I said, I think we got one more song in us. And I was at first looked at like, you're out of your mind. This record's done. Like, what are you talking about? I said, just bear with me. And so I told Roger, I said, pick up that guitar. So he picked up an acoustic guitar, and him and I went and sat in the corner. And we wrote the thing in 5 minutes.
Wow, really?
Yeah. Melodies. And then later that night or the next day, the 5 of us sat in his living room, and we just went round robin and kind of pieced the lyrics together, and the song was done. It was really quick.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And I know, so this is the first album without Vinny, and you guys, you and Roger wrote a lot of the lyrics. So can you tell me a little bit about that? I felt like the record had a lot more, I don't know, adult stuff, but I mean, that's also when you're looking back toward early albums, that comparison's maybe a little more stark. But did you have anything you guys wanted to talk about, like, or anything on your mind when you were writing the lyrics for this record?
Yeah, I think that compared to our early records, those early records were written from the standpoint of experiences that primarily Vinny, who was the primary lyricist, was going through 5 to 10 years prior.
Right.
So those records, when he wrote Losing Streak when he was, 25, 26 years old. So those were culled from experiences that he was going through when he was 15, 16, 17.
Yeah.
Well, I remember when we made Anthem, and, and even Borders and Boundaries, a record prior to that, they weren't immediately gotten from our fan base. And it was 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years later, people are like, I love that record, because now they're going through now they're going through divorces. Now they're going through mortgage problems or job problems or health problems, stuff that they weren't going through when we put that record out, because we were, a little bit older than our fans. So it's always taken them a little bit to catch up. But I've heard that assessment of, it seems a little more, I think you used the word mature. I think that mostly stems from the fact that that, Roger, I definitely write this way. I think Roger does a little bit too. We write from a more immediate personal experience than Vinny did. He's a little more of a storyteller and a little more, for lack of a better word, vague in a great way. His lyrics are awesome, and his lyrics are full of imagery and full of innuendos and things. And I think my lyrics are a little more immediate. Right. And it doesn't make them better. It's just, that's how I write. I wish I could write like him. I wish I could be a little more vague and imaginary, but I write from what I'm feeling and I spit it out a little bit more. And I think that's what you're hearing.
Yeah. Can you tell me what it was like to just having Matt in the studio with you guys? Did that make a different kind of, I mean, you guys have known Matt, he's been in the band for a long time, but doing that first record with him, was that a little different or different dynamic? I mean, not having Vinny, having Matt in there with you.
Yeah. I mean, there was, Vinny had a certain style. Matt has a certain style. Anytime you bring in a different person, it's a different energy.
Yeah, right.
I've always said this, you could bring in, and I've seen it happen. It's like, man, did you hear about that band? They got so-and-so guitarist. And this guitarist can run circles around the first guy from a technical aspect, but the band's not the same.
Yeah, right.
The band's just not the same. Like, he doesn't have his tone. The other guy was sloppy. It was a little dirty. It had this, this little bit of fuzz on it that the new guy doesn't have. And we were mindful of that in a sense. And Matt certainly was. When he came in, he wasn't going to take the back catalog and change it around, the drum parts. So the great thing was we had almost 2 years with Matt. It was a year and a half of him out playing live before we wrote any songs.
Right.
So and of course he was our sound guy for years. He knew the songs inside and out. So we kept the integrity of what Vinny did. And then when we went into the new record, it still had to sound like Less Than Jake. It couldn't be like this totally different style, because Matt can play pretty much everything. He's a really well-versed drummer, and we didn't want to go too left of center with this album. It had to still sound like us. But, Matt comes from a rock background as a drummer. Certainly got into punk rock and plays that style too, but he's a little more of a rock drummer than Vinny. So he just brought a different flavor to it, a different energy, and it's been great. And at the same time, like I said, we've been mindful of wanting it to still sound like our band. So I think we bridged the gap really well.
Yeah, I really like the record. I've been listening to it a bunch, and I also just enjoy. There's just all kinds of different sounds on it. There's slower stuff, and there's almost reggae songs and fast songs and party songs, and it's got a very good cross section of what you guys do, which I really liked.
Yeah, thanks. Like I said, there was really no grand. People have asked, did you think about this record? How the kind of record you wanted to make beforehand? And been asked that a lot, and it's always just been the next batch of songs.
Right.
Like I have tons of ideas on my hard drive and in my phone, voice memos that I'll comb through sometimes, and sometimes I'll just come up with something new. But for me, it's always in the moment. It's never like I want to sit down and write a concept record or write this kind of record. It's just this was just the next group of songs that we wrote.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about how good the reception has been. That's got to just be enjoyable to see people loving it so much.
Yeah, it's cool because I no longer have expectations. When we were on major labels and we had people crunching numbers and working behind us,
right.
We were in that big business where it was like, oh man, we got this single, we're going to do this video, and this has to happen. And so there isn't that, not that it ever really was pressure, but there was a certain accountability. You were working with different people and you had to answer to this person. They had to answer to you. And now it's just, we have to answer to ourselves. And the fact that people like the record is great. But it's also great to be in a position that we are I call it a legacy band. I love it. Make that go off the whole time.
Yeah.
And then it'll make my brain even go crazier than it already is. Trying to keep my sense.
Right? Just loud alarms.
Perfect.
And all the thing.
No, but it's a great position to be in, to have this back catalog of songs that people want to listen to. So we could go out and play shows and not play anything past the millennium, play all our 90s stuff, and people would be stoked.
Yeah.
And that's great. There's some folks that might have an issue with that. Like, well, I want to be relevant now, and I want people to like my new songs now. And, I've been doing this past. And what I've really discovered through it, my podcast, it's the songwriting podcast. And what I've discovered, and I've known this, but I've really started to realize it since I've done the show, is that you can't make up for people's memories. So I could put out Silver Linings, and it could be the best record we've ever done in our career, but it doesn't have 20 years of memories attached to it.
Yes.
When we do these meet and greets with fans, or I'll be at the after show party and someone will come up and talk to me, or people will write me on social media, dude, and it's always a trip down memory lane. Dude, when my wife and I saw you at college at the Mercury Theater, man, you came out and you played this and that, man. Her and I got engaged the next day. That's 20 years of memories that the new album doesn't have attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, the fact that people like the record is just icing on the cake.
Yeah.
And if they didn't like the record, I know in my heart it's a really good album. And that's good enough for me at this point. It might not have been good enough for me 10 or 20 years ago, but it's good enough now, if that makes sense.
Oh, totally. I always think it's when people say, man, they don't make good music anymore. I'm like, no, bullshit. Like, you just, like you said, you have all these memories piled up on top of these things. I'm in my experience, I've noticed that people tend to not add too much music to their lives, like past like high school or college. It's when they learned all these things. It's when they've got their favorite band. It's when they probably had a lot of free time and went to a lot of concerts and stuff. And so, yeah, it's just like, no, there's nothing wrong with liking those things or being that way, but mostly you probably just have memories associated with this because of the time in which you went with them. And I always think of stuff like, if you guys had released Silver Linings 20 years ago instead of now, like what people would think about it too, because of that.
I've posed that question to myself and other people too, and I think that the album would have done amazing.
Right.
I actually think there's a chance that our commercial popularity would have been even bigger with Silver Linings back then. I think the album I think that there's a couple songs on it that rival anything that we did. At the same time, you want to talk about making a mistake as a band, try writing a retro record in the sense that, what, we're going to make Hello Rockview Part 2.
Yeah.
Not in my mid 40s. I'm not, because I don't feel that anymore. I can still go out and play those songs. I can sell them to a live audience because I still feel them for what they are, but I can't write that way today.
Yeah.
I just can't. It's really no different to me than, you were an artist or you were a painter, and at 18, 20 years old, you did these paintings, and now someone's trying to tell you, hey, your new stuff isn't what it used to be. We go, yeah, that's 25 years ago. I'm not experiencing those emotions at this point.
I always think it's funny too. Sorry. I always think it's funny. Like, fans sometimes expect bands not to improve. Like, your skills got better over the last 25 years. How did that happen? Be like, I've been doing this over and over every day. Like, how do you not change?
Yeah, I've gotten better in the last year. I've never spent the amount of time in my studio that I've ever spent. I'd be like, okay, I'm home for 2 weeks and I'll fart around the studio and then we'll go on the road. And then I'm gone for 3 months and then I'll come home again. And I'm not kidding you. 365 days in a year, I was probably in my studio last year 335, 340 days, every day working. Doing songs. I started a custom song writing business.
Oh yeah, I saw that. That's cool.
Yes, so I've been doing that and just doing a bunch of projects. And so, the more that you work on your craft, it's like anything else. You take an athlete and they'll go through these periods of, I'm in the zone and I'm going to work harder. And they find that they were at a plateau for a couple of years, and all of a sudden they did this. And I really feel like I bumped up a notch as a musician the last year. So again, taking into consideration being home, for me, it's another positive.
Right. Well, and you mentioned the podcast too. You started the podcast. So, I mean, this is a perfect time to be doing a podcast.
Yeah, I think that a ton of people have started them. And I think that once people go back on the road, I think you're going to see a million podcasts go and go away. But this isn't going away for me. It's been a huge success, not from a financial standpoint. Podcasts are free. I've just started to monetize it from a advertising level, but it hasn't really. It's not driven by money. It's driven by passion. But my manager, who's also the producer of the show, Chris and I have a vision for way beyond the podcast, but still in the podcast realm of where we want to take this. So again, this never would have happened without the lockdown and me not being able to go on the road. So it's another huge positive because it's given me so many other things and opportunities. And now the show's been out for 8 months. What's really great is we're getting hit up by publicists and managers and record labels now. They want their artists on the show because they realize that we're doing a good thing.
That's awesome. It's such a cool podcast because as a musician and songwriter, talking to another musician and songwriter, I mean, it's people you know and stuff a lot, but it's just such a cool dynamic to have you guys, two people knowing exactly what they're talking about, having that discussion. And also because everybody writes differently. It's a different process for everybody.
Everybody does. It's like I always say, each episode's the same, but they're different.
Right.
The theme's the same, but it's different. No two songwriters are the same. I'm fascinated every time I take a new person on. I learn something new. It's changed my songwriting. I'm looking at songs different. I'm analyzing a song going, that's awesome. I want to write a song where the bridge happens twice. That's fucking cool. So it's helped me. And it's also been really neat from just the aspect that, probably every episode I've done, and either on mic or off mic after when we say our goodbyes, the person will say, that was awesome. I've never done an interview like that, or never done broke down a song like that. It's, I really take it to the nth degree.
Yeah. It's, I've really been enjoying listening to it. It's really cool. And here's one of the things I really loved. As I was going through it, I was like, man, it'd be really cool if Chris was a guest. And then I was like, oh, he is.
Yeah, that was my producer, Chris Fafalius. That was his idea from the very beginning. We got to get you on as a guest. I'm like, how's that work? And that ended up being one of our most popular episodes, which go figure. I'm pandering to my own audience. But it was cool. And the other thing I meant to mention a moment ago about the show is that, and I've gotten this compliment too, and this was thought about early on, is I didn't want to get into too much of talk about gear. Once in a while I'll say, that sounds like a good guitar. I don't want to be like, yeah, is that a Marshall stack through a Marshall amp through this cabinet, through this. You want to lose an audience quick, start talking about that technical kind of stuff. So I've really tried to break it down into layman's terms. So if you're not a musician or you don't understand, like you might know what a chorus of a song is, but you don't know this and that. Like I'll explain what a bridge is and I'll explain things. So, and that's been a great feedback from listeners saying, I don't know anything about this, but I can listen to these episodes and I can learn something and not feel lost. That's right. The last thing you want to do is get someone to listen to your stuff and be like, I don't get this.
Yeah, because it's the fan or the person that's listened to music their entire lives and maybe knows what a verse and a chorus is, but never knew what a bridge was called. People who aren't musicians, and I know people would get way into that gear talk. They just foam.
Yeah,
regular people get lost.
I had to stop myself because I'd be interested in getting into it, but I'll mention it once in a while. Like that sounds like this, but I don't get too deep into it because it's really here nor there. I'm really into the emotion of why the song was written. What was your headspace like? Why did you write this? Why did you do it this way? Get into the psyche of the artist. And I don't know what it is. Chris calls it says I have a knack, and I'm not tooting my own horn, but I've had musicians, even guests on that I don't know personally, that just for just the way I deliver, and they realize the time and the passion that I put into analyzing their song, they open up to me in a crazy way. Like, he's a friend of mine, but I did an episode with Bill Stevenson from Descendants, and it was just heavy, and I've gotten a couple other podcasts, a couple other guests to really open up. I got one coming up pretty soon that's really heavy, that along the lines of Bill, that was just at first, like, we had to stop the podcast a couple times because the person was just like, I really didn't answer that last question and I feel weird. I'm like, okay. It's like, you know what? I need to get this off my chest. I'm going to open up about it. I'm like, cool. And we're going to edit all that little talking out. But then we go, I'll ask the question. So this second verse, where was your head at? And then he'll boom. And it's like those types of connections are what really is really cool and really, really makes me want to continue doing it. It's
right.
Nice.
It's such a personal thing, especially, I mean, some of the things people put in songs. I'm me, like, I don't know how you write that. I don't know how you confess that to a bunch of people. Then I don't know how you do that night after night for 15 years singing that so personal song, which, I mean, part of it's kind of therapeutic, I get. But yeah, it's cool to hear your podcast because of that dynamic. It's really neat.
Yeah, thanks. It's been, like I said, it's been really cool. It's been cool to feel like, even though I'm not on the road, that I'm still connected to the industry. I'm still connected to what I do.
Right.
In an even more personal way. I've gotten to reconnect with some friends. I recently had, I'm not trying to give away all my guests, but recently had a guest on that the episode's not out yet. And I hadn't talked to this guy in a couple of years. He's a dear friend of mine, just hadn't caught up, hadn't seen him at a show in a long time. And so I've been able to reconnect with some people. It's been cool.
That's awesome. And then we're about to run out of time, but Blast from the Past, your book just came out. So that's a photo book, right?
Yeah, it's a picture book with a story for each picture. And that was started, I woke up in December of 2018, December 5th to be exact. And I posted a picture. I had just moved. I had a bunch of pictures. I was going through my studio, putting my memorabilia together, and took a photo, threw it up, put a story with a caption that said, I'm going to put a photo and a story up a day until I pass Roger in Instagram followers. I was just kind of joking. And JR, our sax player, was like, this is good content, but I give it 2 weeks. You're going to stop. And I'm like, I'll show you, you mother, you know what? So probably 3 weeks later, it dawned on me. I'm like, I'm writing my book one story at a time. I'm going to do this for 365 days. So the book is 365 pictures and stories. And it's called Blast from the Past. You can find it Chris DeMakes A Book.com. So
awesome. Yeah, I love it. Those Instagram posts are really funny. I always check those out too. So
cool.
Well, cool, man. Thanks so much for taking the time for me. I really appreciate it. It's been great.
I really appreciate it too.
I just want to say thanks for listening to this episode of Pops and Hisses. I had a great time talking to Chris DeMakes from Less Than Jake. I want to let you know that you can subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app, or head to popsandhisses.com, where you listen to the podcast, find more music news, reviews, interviews, and, of course, more podcast episodes. I'm your host, Kevin Coffey, and if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can do that at Omaha Music Guy, or find my page on Facebook by searching for Kevin Coffey. My last name is spelled Coffey, by the way. Thanks to Hurrdat Media for producing the show and having me on the network. I encourage you to check out all of Hurrdat's podcasts. There's a whole network of them, like Hollywood Raw, if you're into entertainment, Schick and Nick Show, if you're into sports, Meathead Test Kitchen, where they talk about food and fitness, or Drunkenomics, for drinking and, economics. So find them all and lots more at hurrdatmedia.com/network. That's HURRDAT media.com. Thanks for listening. See you guys next time.
A Hurrdat Media Production.